Plant Powered Plus. Activate the power of your gut to tame inflammation. And we're thrilled to have the one and only Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. And I'm going to let you know a little bit about Dr. B. So, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, also known as Dr. B, is an award-winning gastroenterologist, gut health expert, and New York Times bestselling author. Dr. B received his medical degree from Georgetown University and a master's in clinical investigation from Northwestern University. He earned the highest clinical honors in both his residency at Northwestern and his gastroenterology fellowship at UNC, recognition reserved for the top physician in each graduating class. He also completed an NIH-funded fellowship in epidemiology at UNC. He has authored more than 25 scientific papers. His work has been cited more than 5,000 times by other scientists, and he has delivered numerous keynotes as well as briefings to Congress, the USDA, and the NFL alumni. His books, Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook, have over 500,000 copies in print and are translated into 20 languages. His highly anticipated third book, Plant Powered Plus, was released on January 13th, 2026. Lastly, Dr. B is the founder of science-driven supplement brand 38 Terra and is the U.S. Medical Director of personalized nutrition company Zoe. Through these roles, he has influenced the gut health landscape from both the research and product sides to deliver real-world impact. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina with his wife and 4 kids and offers free resources at theguthealthmd.com. Wow. With all that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Will Bulsiewicz. So handing it over to you, Dr. B.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Melissa. It's a great honor. And translation, I'm a nerd. So, and I think that's going to come through. You'll be able to see those things here today. So, and what I'm going to do is let me load up my slides and we're going to take a dive into the topic of inflammation, which I think is the most important health-related topic of our time right now. And this is the topic of my new book, Plant Powered Plus. So it's no coincidence that we're here in the Plant Powered Challenge, and here we are, and I have my brand new book, Plant Powered Plus, that I'm quite proud of, and I spent 3 years researching. And I want to discuss what I learned during those 3 years with you today. And it's a little bit like taking a cruise through Europe because you stop at all these different places and you have only a brief period of time in each of these places and you get a taste and then what you say is, hey, I want to come back for more. So that's what we're going to be doing today is taking a quick little cruise. These are my disclosures, which were already for the most part mentioned. Um, so let's start off with a case, which is this is a real person. I changed her name, of course, and her name is Michelle, and she has a severe C. diff infection, manifest with high fever, pain. She is delirious. She has no clue what's going on. She doesn't know what year it is. She barely knows her own first name. Her heart is racing 114 times a minute. She's breathing so fast. You can see it. She's just breathing so fast, 24 times a minute. And she has an extremely high white count. Her temperature, by the way, is 102.1. I was called to consult on this patient years ago. And what I was told is you need to get in here right now. And I was in the middle of writing up a consult. I dropped what I was doing and literally ran through the hospital to enter into her room. And I saw her there clutching her chest, clutching her abdomen in extreme pain. And if I just gently bumped the edge of that bed, she would scream, moan in pain because she had so much discomfort. This is a patient who is uh, in terrible need of acute urgent care. And what we were dealing with was a severe C. diff infection. And now the traditional teaching that I received in medical school is when you have an infection, that's a bad bacteria. We need to kill that bacteria. And the problem is that within this context, she was already on supercharged antibiotics. We had her on oral medicines, vancomycin. We had her on IV medicines, IV flagyl. And despite these things, despite our attempts to destroy the pathogen, she wasn't getting better. So basically, we're at a point where if I followed the traditional approach, I need to call a surgeon and have that surgeon remove her colon. And once we do that, she'll live the rest of her life without a colon. Now, this is a Hail Mary to keep her alive. But I saw an alternative choice. And this alternative choice is built on the framework of the gut immune connection. I'm calling it the gut immune new school because it's a shift in the way that we think, where we stop saying we need to destroy everything that we don't like, and we instead say we're going to rebuild. We're going to rebuild the gut microbiome. And by rebuilding the microbiome, we can actually protect the immune system and reduce inflammation. And in doing this, actually restore health to Michelle without having to take her colon out. And the way that we would accomplish that is a fecal transplant. And the thing about this is that Michelle walked out of the hospital 2 days later with her colon intact because we chose this alternative approach. So let's talk about inflammation because to me, this is the story of our time when it comes to health. If I were to look at all of the major health related issues that we currently are struggling with, you're going to find that inflammation is a part of that story. And that's not to say that inflammation is the whole story. In some cases, it's an accessory, but this is a part of the story to be dealt with. Now, inflammation at baseline is not bad. In fact, the reason why we developed inflammation from an evolutionary perspective is very important because there's a period of time, 99.99% of human history, where the main threats that we had were bodily injury or infection. And our immune system, when activated to remove threats and initiate healing, that is what inflammation is, that is a good thing. When you are healing your body from an injury, when you are fighting an infection, when you are eliminating toxins, those are good things. We need our immune system in that moment. And you can see over here on the right-hand side that I have a list of different things that can manifest in terms of symptoms of acute inflammation. And that includes redness and heat, swelling, and discomfort. And this is what happens when a person, for example, has like an inflamed knee. It gets red, it gets hot, it gets swollen, it's painful. And if you allow that inflammation to persist, eventually it causes damage to that knee, long-term damage, or it can spread and cause inflammation throughout the entire body. So the beginning point is good, but where we go is not good, which is chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is the persistent, long-term activation of the immune system. The initial issue has gone away, but we have an ongoing issue that we need to address. And that inflammation, it may be low grade, it may be difficult to detect, but what you can see over here on the right side is these are symptoms that many people experience. Low altered mood, like depressed mood, menopausal symptoms, poor blood sugar control. All right, so we experience these things. We don't ascribe them to inflammation. And the problem is that at the root, now I'm not the only cause of fatigue, but in many cases, it is. And when you combine all of these symptoms, it may be an inflammatory health condition that we're struggling with. And you could go to 5 different doctors for 5 different health issues. And what they're going to do is prescribe 5 different medicines. And what they're never going to do is tell you that there's this one thing that's tying it all together in one word: inflammation. And as I was researching for this book, I asked the question, like, how many health conditions are there that are common and that we're struggling with, where I can pull a study and show you with confidence as a medical doctor, hey, here's the study that proves to you that there is inflammation in association with this health condition. So I asked that question and I discovered over 130 different health conditions, which you can see here. And my intent is not to put this on the screen for you to try to scan the entire list. That's overwhelming. I'm intending to overwhelm you right now because you need to know that inflammation is so pervasive on so many different things that we think of. And we just don't realize, hey, here's that thing that's sort of fueling disease. So I would argue that we need to rethink our approach. And, our traditional healthcare system, We like basically structure it in a way where you go to see your doctor identifies specific diagnoses that they can put a code down on a piece of paper. And then based upon that code, they can also make recommendations on how they're going to treat you with medications or surgery. And ultimately, the approach is predominantly built on symptom suppression, where it's like, look, if we can get rid of your symptoms and you don't feel that the disease is there, then it almost is like you can pretend that the disease isn't there, but it's still there. You didn't address the root of the issue. And ultimately, what we should be doing is addressing the root of the issue to minimize disease, ideally remove disease, and get ourselves into a position where by addressing the root of the issue, we're far healthier. And that's what this new concept of gut immune health is about, where we can see that there's this shared underlying mechanism with these different health conditions, a damaged microbiome, which we call dysbiosis, leading to the manifestation of inflammation, and that we can build a comprehensive lifestyle-based approach to these different conditions, to the underlying inflammation that includes diet and lifestyle elements and supplements when appropriate, evidence-based, of course, and medicine when appropriate, evidence-based, of course, and we still have surgery as an option if we need it. So we're not foregoing any of the things that are evidence-based. In fact, what we're doing is we're building a smart strategy to take advantage of all of the things that are evidence-based in a very pragmatic, intelligent way. So, and when we do this, when we heal the gut microbiome, what I'm going to show you is that you can reduce inflammation. And that's the thesis of my entire talk, because it's built around these 3 layers of defense. You know, most of us, including most medical doctors, if I say, hey, what is it that defends your body? The first thing they would say is your immune system. Fair enough. But I would argue that's number 3. The first thing is the gut microbes. And the second thing is your gut barrier. And then the third thing is your immune system. So I want to take you on a journey into a microscopic world to explain these things. But in order to do that, to not make it so complex, because it is complex, we're going to pretend that we're entering into the medieval realm similar to Game of Thrones. Okay, so let's talk about this. Your first line of defense. Imagine for a moment that you have this castle. You can see that castle in the background there. And there's going to be people that live in the village surrounding the castle. And those are the people that power the castle. You know, the castle may stand there as this edifice of strength, but it's not that strong without those people that are surrounding the castle, and those are your gut microbes. And just like the people who live in the village surrounding the castle, they are providing what the castle needs. They are providing the food like a farmer, or they're providing the tools like a blacksmith or like a carpenter. And they also are doing something really important, which is that they are helping to build and repair the walls of that castle, so that by keeping the walls of that castle in tip-top shape every single day, when you need it, it's strong and it's there to protect you. So these gut microbes that surround the castle, this is your first line of defense, and there are 38 trillion of them, mostly living inside of your colon, mostly bacteria, some yeasts, possibly these ones called archaea that I'm quite interested in, but that's a discussion for another day. And it's quite fascinating to consider that these microbes, they outnumber your human cells. You are less than 50% human. So, and that brings us to the second line of defense, which is the castle wall. So, you know, we are trying to protect you. You are the king or the queen. You exist within the walls of that castle. We want to keep any invaders out who are trying to come in and disrupt and cause trouble. So we build this wall that surrounds us. Those are the walls of the castle. And by the way, to add an extra layer that is interesting and aligns with how the body works, we can build a moat too. So the moat is what we would call your mucin layer. Your mucin layer is like a jelly layer But that jelly layer actually is perilous for those invaders. If they try to get into your castle, they have to go through that jelly layer, and there's all kinds of traps set up inside of it. So the mucin layer is actually part of the gut barrier. It sits there. But then we have the gut barrier, which is much like the walls of the castle, made up of bricks that are held together by cement. Now, those bricks in the human body, those are our epithelial cells, and they're held together by proteins called tight junctions. The tight junctions are like the cement. And it's a fascinating part of the body because every 3 to 4 days, we rebuild the entirety of this wall. Imagine rebuilding a castle wall every 3 to 4 days. That would be a lot of work. That's what's happening inside of you. As we sit here now, your body is constantly repairing and restoring, and every 3 to 4 days, all 15 to 20 feet of your intestines are being rebuilt with a brand new castle wall. And what that means is that if we don't take care of this, if we don't have the proper resources, if we don't build up those microbes that are the ones working on the wall, then the wall won't be very strong. But on the flip side, if we can bring awareness to the fact that you are rebuilding your castle wall every 3 to 4 days, so let's power it with the tools, with the resources. Let's power those microbes so that they're strong and able to function and do their job. If we do those things, you will have a strong castle wall, and it will perform its job in a beautiful, powerful way, the way that you want it to. So, and then the third layer of defense is where you go inside the castle. And this is where the army is, right? Like push comes to shove, you get invaded, you close off the castle wall, you close the gates, and you get your army inside, and your army's there to protect you. And when we think about the army, we kind of like split it up into two main parts, which is the innate immune system. So the innate immune system are the everyday soldiers, and basically like, they're super simple, right? Like they have simple weapons, and they basically just do what they're told. So they have been trained. Okay, this is what the bad guy looks like. If you see the bad guy, you attack it. That's the way they work, right? They're just like super. They're so basic in their approach to defense. And oh, I should mention real quick that they can talk to one another. So, and the way that they talk to one another is through messenger chemicals called cytokines. So if you hear people talking about cytokines, these are just like little notes that basically immune cells are passing to one another. So when you hear about inflammatory cytokines, what that means is like basically there's a message going out, hey, everyone, get your weapons up, get ready because we're about to have a fight, right? Or anti-inflammatory cytokines are, hey, take a deep breath. We're okay. You don't need to worry about fighting right now, right? You need to focus on training and just be ready when we need you. Okay, so just be aware that like these messages can manipulate the army in one direction or the opposite. And then we also have the adaptive immune system, which is the supercharged special forces. They are so strong, but they're also highly specialized and precise, and it takes them a little bit of time to basically build the weapons of war that they need to protect your body. And those weapons of war are antibodies. Once they build the antibodies for a specific threat, they can pull them out whenever they need them. They're ready to go. But the first time they see a new threat, they're like, "Oh, I've never seen you before. Okay, I'm gonna like build a custom weapon. It's gonna take me 5 days. And then when that custom weapon is ready, you're done." And that's what happens. They're done the minute that they pull out those antibodies. So now think about this though. What happens if these highly specialized immune cells they get confused and they think that actually the people that live inside of that hut, inside the walls of the castle, are the enemy? What happens then? Well, then they start making these antibodies to go against the hut, which lives within the castle wall. And this is what an autoimmune disease is, right? An autoimmune disease is where basically your body and its immune system is turning on itself and attacking its own people and causing trouble. Um, so, or like an allergic disease would be if they turn against the supplies that are coming from the outside. So, like things that are completely benign and not going to cause trouble. What happens if they build weapons to destroy all the food that's coming in, right? That's what a food allergy would be. Okay, so but the key here is that like we see these layers of defense. We see, the villagers on the outside, which are the microbes, which are educating the immune cells and they're producing bioactive chemicals and they're maintaining the gut barrier. And then you see the gut barrier, the walls of the castle that allow the good stuff in, like allowing the nutrients that we want, allow them in, but keep the pathogens out, keep the toxins out. And then you also see the immune system that is basically set up inside. And it is basically structured in a way to react and respond when there is a threat. And when there is activation based upon a threat, that's inflammation. That's what we're talking about. They, one of the messages that I want you to hear is that they're interconnected. So you can't separate them. So they rise and they fall together. And that's an important part of the thesis here because what happens is, like, for example, if we develop dysbiosis, which is damage to the gut microbiome, then that dysbiosis is going to affect the gut barrier. It compromises the gut barrier. And when the gut barrier is not strong, then it allows things to get through. And the immune system feels threatened. And when the immune system feels threatened, it activates. And then you get this activation of the immune system, which is chronic low-grade inflammation. And that actually starts to damage the walls of the castle because you can't have people fighting just inside the walls of the castle and not have any consequences to that. When they're fighting, it's going to affect the walls of the castle. So the gut barrier starts to break down. And then when the gut barrier starts to break down, that starts to actually trickle out into the villagers who are outside, and it causes damage to the microbiome. And basically this is a vicious cycle, right? Because now we're back to dysbiosis and we have created this cycle of injury, which is not what we want. But, it's important to understand that, like, as I sit here and share that there's a connection between these gut microbes and the gut barrier and your immune system. I went back to the list of 130 different health conditions, over 130 different health conditions. And I asked the second question, how many of them are associated with dysbiosis? Because if my thesis is true, then they should be. And the answer was they were. And so you can see the list of health conditions that are associated with dysbiosis here. So the point is, like, if the gut microbiome gets compromised, then that affects the gut barrier, which leads to inflammation. But it's important to also understand that the gut microbiome and dysbiosis are the result of the environment that surrounds it. So, like in this picture, this is what a reef looks like after it's bleached out, and because the environment has become unfriendly, inhospitable. And so that uh, unfriendly, unhealthy environment ultimately has an effect on the residents within that environment, and that disrupts it, and then it falls out of balance. And this is what gut dysbiosis is. But we have the opportunity and the power to change that. And it's just a matter of understanding how this works and creating lifestyle patterns that are for healing. Because if we're totally unaware, then we're just going to get whatever comes to us. And the problem is when we have a culture that is inflammatory, that's not a good thing. And then our health gets compromised. But on the flip side, if we create a culture for ourselves, if we create a culture within our home, if we create a culture amongst our social networks, if we create a culture within our communities of health, of healing, then we have a superpower as humans, which is that we can shape and control this environment that ultimately affects these gut microbes. We have this godlike superpower where by shaping the environment, we can make the microbiome less healthy, but we also can do the opposite of that, which is to restore the gut microbiome, make it more healthy. So everyday habits that you make, that you have, They can be to your benefit or to your detriment. We want to install the ones that are beneficial. Think about how much has changed. I think about this all the time. I'm a Gen Xer, and I think about my grandparents who lived through the Great Depression and um, fought in World War II. And we went from an environment in a very short period of time where there was no electricity, there was no electronics, there were no artificial lights. We rose when the sun came up. We worked really hard to find and gather our food. We had to work within communities of people to protect and support one another, because if we didn't do that to each other, then we weren't going to receive that benefit ourselves. And so we actually became mutually dependent on one another in a really meaningful way. And then the sun goes down at the end of the day and we go to sleep. That's where we came from. And now here we are. We wake up groggy. We get caffeined up. We eat our high carbohydrate, refined carbohydrate breakfast. We spend hours sitting in a chair, staring at bright screens, not moving around. We believe that social networks come on devices where we talk to people and do hearts and things like this. And yet we actually feel more disconnected and lonely than ever before. And then we stare at bright screens deep into the night, and then we can't understand why we're having trouble sleeping, right? Like, this is where we are. And these are choices that we've made culturally. We are evolutionary pioneers. We have the ability to set this environment. We've chosen something, a direction in the last 100 years that is radically different than where we came from. And our body isn't able to keep up with the pace of change. And so on some level, we have to understand where we came from and restore that. And think about our nutrition. So yes, we hear about SOS free. And then there's an entire conversation around this. There's no such thing as perfection. So I want to meet people where they are. I certainly am not perfect. I also enjoy sweets. My kids will tell you this, even when I don't want them to. Um, we all need to do our best. But I think that we can also be empowered by knowledge of understanding how this works. Look at sugar, reducing gut diversity, reducing gut barrier function associated with many health conditions. Look at unhealthy fats like trans fats associated with dysbiosis and inflammation, excess saturated fat intake, and this is not to say that all saturated fat intake is inherently automatically bad. I think that there's a conversation that's more nuanced there. But when it's excessive, in the absence of fiber, increasing bacterial toxins, increasing our inflammatory response. Look at what happens when we cook our food at high heat, meaning like fried. Oxidizing the fats, reducing gut diversity. I don't believe there's such a thing as a healthy high heat cooking. They're all shades of things that are problematic. Look at the effect of salt. Why do we use salt in fermented food? Because salt can manipulate the microbes, but if you have too much of them, it will reduce the beneficial ones. It will reduce short-chain fatty acid production. It'll increase immune cells, Th17 immune cells, that have been linked to autoimmune diseases. So as you can see, this SOS-free concept, there's a merit in the microbiome. And when you combine them, it becomes more complex. And that's what the food industry has done, is pull them together into one. Why? Because people want that, because it tastes good. We have been trained to go after these things for a reason. But then when you combine them, you create the Western diet. And the Western diet, here's a list of the health conditions broken down by category associated with the Western diet. It's not 130 something, but it's a very similar list to what we were looking at before in terms of inflammation, in terms of gut dysbiosis. Why? Because the Western diet is associated with dysbiosis, associated with inflammation. And then there's ultra-processed foods. The issue is, it's not an argument that we should be 0% ultra-processed foods, although I do think that in many cases we would be healthier if we did. But, being reasonable, it's going to be hard for people to completely eliminate ultra processed foods. But right now, for us as adults, this is 60% of calories. And these ultra processed foods, you can't make them. That's what separates them. You can't make them because you don't get the ingredients. You don't have the ingredients and you can't buy the ingredients because these are industrial chemicals that are required to create ultra processed foods. And there's 10,000 of these chemicals that are in our food supply now, and we don't know very much about them. But through a loophole called generally recognized as safe, we have introduced them, and there's no turning back. And as time goes on, we start to learn about the potential effect, but it's really hard. It's really hard to, how do you disentangle a knot of 10,000 different things and try to figure out what's causing what? Where's the problem? What specific thing is causing a problem when you got 10,000 of them? And we're all consuming them in varied proportions. But like, if we look here, artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, food colorants. Here's what happens in all three of these cases. Reduced gut diversity, increased gut permeability, increased gut inflammation. And you can see the health conditions that have been associated, not to mention Crohn's disease associated with these different food additives, ulcerative colitis associated with emulsifiers and food colorants. And there's a recent umbrella review where the British Medical Journal looked at 45 different health conditions and asked the question, like, what happens when people consume ultra processed foods with these 45 different health conditions? What they found was that in 32 out of 45, there was a statistically significant increase in disease when you consume fermented foods. Statistically significant increase. But what if you look at this, because I do, of saying, hey, this data is young. When I wrote Fiber Fueled in 2020, there were very few studies. There was nowhere close to 45. So now we're up to 45. This is young data. What if we're just too early and we need more data points? What they found in this umbrella review is 42 out of the 45 show an increased risk. So it's not statistically significant, but my expectation would be if we had more data, I think many of them would be. And last but not least, 70% of our calories in our kids. So I said 60% in adults, and in our kids is 70%. And for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food intake, their risk of early death goes up by 14%. Well, that is not good math because 7 times 14 is 98. And so what I'm saying is if the average kid in America is 70% ultra-processed foods based upon this data, that would mean a 98% increased risk of early death for our children. And that's not something I'm willing to accept. I have 4 kids. So this talk isn't about just the problems. This is about solutions. And so I want to take you on a world tour. We're going to hop on this plane together. We're going to go to this beautiful place that you see. I'm querying you to, in your mind, think about where is this place? And the answer to that question is that we have entered into the Mediterranean, where ancient wisdom meets modern evidence. And a Mediterranean diet, which I would make a strong argument, this is the most scientifically validated study for health, most scientifically validated diet for health that exists. There's nothing else that can compare in terms of the breadth, the quality, the number of studies that are done on a Mediterranean pattern. It doesn't mean it's the only way, but I think this is, without a doubt, a valid approach. And when it comes to the gut, the Mediterranean diet has been shown to increase gut diversity, increase the production of short-chain fatty acids, and protect against autoimmune disease, while also decreasing inflammation. So, and I would imagine many of you are familiar with the tenets of a Mediterranean diet, but basically this is a plant predominant diet. You're eating mostly plants. And then when you choose things that are not plant-based, it's in moderation and it tends to be higher quality. So for example, among animal-based foods, you opt for seafood as opposed to red meat or processed meats. And among dairy products, you opt for fermented dairy products, and you really attempt to minimize red meat, sweets, and ultra-processed foods with a Mediterranean pattern. And that brings me to the PREDIMED study, which to me is one of the great nutrition studies of my lifetime. And I would argue one of the greatest nutrition studies of the 21st century, where basically they took 7,500 people who were at high cardiovascular risk. They had not yet had a heart attack or a stroke, but they had the risk factors for it. And they randomized these people into three groups. You either were following a low fat diet, or it was a high fat Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil, like extra virgin olive oil. So they were adding a lot of extra virgin olive oil. Or it was a high fat Mediterranean diet with extra nuts. And if you were in the olive oil group, every single day, 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. And if you were in the nuts group, every single day, a specific amount of these nuts that included walnuts and other types. So here's what they found after around 5 years for the individual participants. And these people, they were not on a calorie restriction, right? So basically it's like, here's the basis of your diet. Here's what we want you to eat until you're full. These people had improved cardiovascular biomarkers. These people on the Mediterranean diet, they had improved cognitive function. They had improved heart function. They had less heart attacks. They had less strokes. I'm sorry, let me be clear. They had a reduction in the combined endpoint of heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death, which was the primary outcome. So their entire purpose of the study was to say, can we reduce this combination of heart inflammation, C-reactive protein, which is a measure of inflammation, down by 35 to 45%. IL-6, another cytokine marker of inflammation, lowered by 90 to 95%. Okay, we'll leave the Mediterranean now. That's my compelling argument. We're going to a new place. This is not the Mediterranean. It kind of looks like Hawaii, but it's not. This is a different place. Here's another hint. Okay, so we have entered into Japan, where tradition meets modern medicine, and it creates a gut healing combination. That's what we're trying to do. I want to help you combine tradition with modern medicine in a gut healing kind of a way. So, and if you think about where Japanese culture came from, it started with vegetables and grains and legumes and seafood and fermented food. And it was typically seasonal and locally sourced. And this is why you have Okinawa as one of the blue zones, where there's a high concentration of centenarians, because they're eating a traditionally plant-forward diet. And unfortunately, Westernization has washed across the shores of Japan, where they have adopted a more Americanized way of life, right? Coca-Cola and McDonald's, guess what? They're showing up. And as people have shifted towards ultra-processed foods and a more Western diet, they have seen the rise in chronic inflammatory health conditions, including Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, things that they didn't really have a problem with before. And it's interesting because if you look at this graph over here on the right, what you see is this is from 1965 until the year 2000, and you see how ulcerative colitis has really taken off. And you see how Crohn's disease has also increased in a similar fashion. Not the same, but quite a bit. And if we look at their dietary patterns over the course of this period of time, what you see is an increase in animal protein and animal fat and a reduction in rice. Is it rice that's the key issue? No. Rice is a marker for a traditional Japanese diet. So when you're following a traditional Japanese diet, you include rice. And when you reduce your consumption of a traditional Japanese diet, you start to exclude rice. And that's what you're seeing here. And so they have the explosion of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And so this interesting group of gastroenterologists, they went and they basically put people on a flexitarian diet in combination with infliximab, which is a biologic anti-inflammatory drug. What they discovered is that among people who have Crohn's disease, they had a 96% remission rate at 1 year. Now, this is amazing because normally with infliximab alone, that would be 59%. So in other words, if I were to say to you that you have a 15 and 25 chance of being in remission a year from now, which is slightly more than 50-50, or alternatively, by incorporating dietary change along with this medication, I can get you up to 24 out of 25 chance. If you were the patient with a vicious health condition like Crohn's disease, I think the choice is obvious. And the really cool thing is that when they looked at these people after 10 years of combination flexitarian plant predominant diet with infliximab, 50% of them were still in remission after 10 years. That's amazing. 10 years. It means half of them hadn't even had a single flare in 10 years. That's amazing. So, ulcerative colitis, their C-reactive protein started at 9.4. Clinicians know that's ridiculously high. That's ridiculously high. And what happened is it dropped all the way down to 0.33. They also had a dramatic reduction for patients with ulcerative colitis in the need for surgery. So there were many benefits to following this pattern of plants plus medication. We don't need to choose one or the other. Why not both? Combining the best. Okay, here's our third place that we're traveling to together. Y'all know? This is a place very close to home for us. It's Loma Linda, California, a longevity oasis here in the United States, home to the Seventh-day Adventists, where they follow a whole food plant-based diet, and they also have active lifestyles, and they create meaningful social connections. These people, although they live in the same country as us, have the same healthcare system as us, don't have a special food supply. They live up to 10 years longer than the average American. So it's a quite fascinating thing. And they really demonstrate to us the concept of being plant-powered. Because within Loma Linda, they have conducted a study called the Adventist Health Study 2, the Adventist Health Study 2, where there's nearly 100,000 participants. And what they found is whether it was vegan or vegetarian or pescatarian or flexitarian, all of these plant predominant diets led to improvements in health. By the way, they also looked at body mass index, and you can see the progression of body mass index, where the lowest are among those who are vegan. By the way, less than 25 would be considered normal. So the only group that was considered normal was the vegan group. But there's clearly a difference between these three groups, or between these five groups. And that leads me to, sort of putting this on the table of the concept of plant-powered diets, that I don't think it's one size fits all. In fact, I think that the approach that's going to work best for the individual person, you, sitting at home listening to me right now, the approach that's going to work best for you is the one that you're willing to do. And you have options. It's not just like forcing yourself to do something that you're not really excited about doing. How about we find the thing that you are excited about doing, and let's just make sure that it's plant predominant. And if we do that, I think you're going to feel the difference. And this is not just like, where are you 3 months from now? This to me is about creating habits that heal for the rest of your life. But we have choices, and they all have anti-inflammatory benefits. And the question is, like, when you look at that list, what is it that ties them all together? And the answer is what I call the 4 workhorses of plant-powered nutrition, because these are the things, the pieces that power an anti-inflammatory diet. So no matter what label you apply, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Mediterranean, flexitarian, no matter what label you apply, you will find these 4 core things powering those diets, and that's why they're healthy. And by the way, all 4 of these things are missing in the average American diet. And I'm trying to remedy that, because I sincerely believe that if I can address these 4 things in the health of many, but starting with one, starting with you, if I can do that, then I am convinced that I will radically transform your health. and improve the health of this country. So without further ado, let's jump into the four because you need to know this. First of all is fiber. I don't know if you know, I don't know if you heard, but I kind of like the stuff. So why? Because fiber is food for the gut microbiome. And when we consume fiber, it stops being fiber and it is transformed into something different by coming into contact with our gut microbes. And it's truly symbiotic, mutually beneficial, where our microbes are fed and stronger because of the fiber that we ate. We're feeding them. Just like us. We can't see them, they're microscopic, but just like us, when they're not well fed, they get hangry and they're not good at their job. Just like us, when you nourish them with anti inflammatory food, which for them is fiber, they're great at their job. They're strong, they're powerful, and they're born to do this. And when they do that and transform the fiber, they release the most anti inflammatory compounds that I've ever come across, the short chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Now, these short chain fatty acids, to me, this is the key to gut health. This is the key. Why? Because they change the microbiome. They restore anti inflammatory. They are the essential piece, specifically butyrate, for repairing and restoring the gut barrier. That's the second layer of our defense system. And they have a direct effects on our immune system to suppress inflammatory cytokines, to increase anti-inflammatory cytokines, the signaling cells, to release certain immune cells that are anti-inflammatory and help to get our immune system properly organized and make it more precise and strong. That's the third layer of our defense system. They affect directly all three layers of our defense system. And this is one of the ways in which you can rise together. You can improve the gut microbiome and the gut barrier and the immune system at the same time, but through the consumption of this one nutrient, fiber. All right, number two, the polyphenols. You walk into your supermarket, you are struck by the colors. There's a reason why they put the fresh produce at the entrance to your supermarket. It's inviting. It's inviting you in. It's highly pleasant, makes it attractive to walk in. And all those colors come from families of chemicals that exist within these plants called polyphenols. And these polyphenols actually behave very similar to fiber. Now, to be clear, it's not the same. Okay, I'm going to explain how it's different. But the way in which it's similar is that polyphenols, they go into your mouth and they need the microbes to get activated. So they wiggle their way through your intestine, they enter your large intestine, they come into contact with your gut microbiome, and those microbes go to work and they release the polyphenol. And then that polyphenol can enter into your bloodstream. It could be resveratrol, or it could be curcumin, or it could be quercetin. But basically, in order to get access to them, we need our microbes. But now our microbes are healthier. And so as a result, there's this symbiotic relationship where through consumption of polyphenol foods, we can enhance our microbiome and our barrier and our immune system in the process, much like we can with fiber. All right, number three, healthy fats. So I feel like fat requires nuance because it's not fair. We don't like it when people say that all carbs are bad. I don't like it when people say that all carbs are bad. Fiber is a carb. I also don't think it's fair to say all protein is bad. We need protein. And I don't think it's fair to say all fat is bad. There are fats that we clearly need. We call them essential. So what we want is we want to replace the unhealthy fats, like the trans fats and the saturated fats, with the healthy ones. And the healthy ones are the monounsaturated fats that we find in avocados and nuts and extra virgin olive oil that reduce our risk of heart disease, that enhance the health of our gut microbiome. Or the polyunsaturated fats, and specifically the omega-3 polyunsaturated fats that we are missing, that we get from chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, but we also get from supplements and we also get from marine life. So fish, shellfish, things like this. We need to make sure that we have an adequate amount of these omega-3 polyunsaturated fats because we need them for our brain, we need them for our immune system, we need them for our gut. And last but not least are the fermented foods. This is a unique category because it's not just the nutrient, it's actually what we're doing to the food, which is fermentation, which is transformation. And the sugar is transformed into organic acid or into prebiotic fiber. The starches become resistant starches. The fats, they change. They become more anti-inflammatory. The proteins, they change. They become bioactive peptides. Other nutrients are created. Polyphenols become more bioavailable. B vitamins are produced. We're able to better absorb our minerals. We reduce the gluten content. We reduce the FODMAP content. We reduce the pesticide residues. There's a lot of benefit to fermentation. And the vast majority of us get almost none of these types of food in our diet. And yet these are tradition-based foods. Every culture in human history, up until ours, included fermented foods as a part of their celebrated food tradition. It's time to bring them back. And it leads me to the Sonnenberg study. This is out of Stanford University, done by several of my friends, the Sonnenbergs and also Christopher Gardner, where they did a randomized controlled trial. And the participants consumed fermented foods every single day for 10 weeks. And what they found is by 8 weeks, you can see it right here, by 8 weeks, they had significantly increased their gut diversity. That's amazing. Think about that you could add fermented foods and in a human clinical trial actually increase gut diversity in real time. Fascinating. So that brings me to the golden rule of gut health. Some of you who have followed my work, you've heard me talk about this. We should eat for diversity. We should eat for variety. Every single plant has unique features, unique nutrients that can feed our gut microbes, that can make us healthier. This is why I say eat 30 different plants per week, because when you combine varieties, you get the fiber, you get the polyphenols, you get the healthy fats. And if you're being smart about it, you're getting the fermented food too. So I say, stop counting grams of fiber, start counting plants. Because that's what I want you to target. I actually don't think you should worry about. I know you're going to want to know, how many grams of fiber do I need, Dr. B? And I'm saying that's fine, but really what matters is focusing on variety. And if you focus on variety, you will crowd your plate. And when you crowd your plate, you will get enough fiber in your diet. But the thing is that gut immune health isn't just about nutrition. In fact, I hate that sometimes we make it, myself included, that we make it seem this way. That there are ways that we can heal the gut without even lifting a fork. And it's important that we acknowledge that. Because number one, like timing is really important. So think about our circadian rhythm for a moment, where basically our circadian rhythm helps to get our body into alignment. Think about a symphony. And you have all these different instruments out there. And there's the conductor. And the conductor's job is to get them all in synchrony, working together. And when they are in synchrony, they make beautiful music. And when they are out of synchrony, it's hard on the ears. So we have this way in which this works. And actually, it's built around light exposure, where the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN in the brain, is basically like trying to pay attention to light signals. Because when the sun comes up, that means it's time to start. And when the sun goes down, that means it's time to wind down. So the body is adapting and adjusting throughout the day based upon those signals. And our microbes, they're responding and reacting too. So it turns out that research has found that more than half of our gut microbes exhibit a 24-hour circadian rhythm. During the day, they're focused on energy metabolism and producing protein. And at night, they're moving in a different direction. They're focused on detoxification and maintenance. And turns out the gut barrier has a rhythm too. It has its own circadian rhythm. So this is all quite interesting to consider that circadian rhythm could be such a powerful thing. So this is an interesting study where they took a group of humans who flew from the United States to Israel. And this is an 8 to 10 hour time zone shift. So like jet lag. And they checked their microbiome before the travel and one day after travel and then 2 weeks later. So 3 time points. What they found is compared to before travel, when they arrived, they had gut dysbiosis because their body was out of rhythm. And then when they checked 2 weeks later, they recovered. And they took those 3 samples and they put them into mice. And what they discovered, which is quite fascinating if you look at these graphs, is that the jet lagged sample those mice gained more weight, but the other 2 samples before travel and after 2 weeks of recovery, they were the same. So in other words, the microbiome that was dysbiotic, you could feed them the same food. They gained more weight. Or you could feed them the same food and they had a higher blood sugar spike. So quite fascinating to think about this. So just 30 minutes of sunlight in the morning can make a huge difference because it trains your body for the rest of the day. That light exposure helps you to improve your sleep, increase your energy, improve gut motility, makes you more focused. I find this to be highly important. I do this every morning with my wife. We take a walk together, typically with our youngest one. And timing does in fact matter when it comes to our food. Consistent meal times can make a difference. Timing can make a difference. They found, for example, that you could eat the same calories, mostly in the morning, and here's all the benefits that you get. Or you could be consistent. And if you're inconsistent, you increase your risk of these health issues. Or that just 12 hours of overnight fasting are beneficial to the gut microbiome. We actually did a study on this at Zoe with 40,000 people, and we had them do a 14-hour fast every day. And what they reported back to us is they had more energy, they improved their mood, they were less hungry, and they had less bloating. And when the study was done and we told them you can go home, you don't need to do this anymore, 96% of them kept doing it because they felt better. And last but not least, I want to talk about the power of connection because I think this is important. Gut immune health isn't just what we eat, and it also isn't just about physical health, although it can manifest physically. So it's important to understand that we have the autonomic nervous system, which is broken into 2 main parts. Think of it as like the engine that drives your body, where when you need a surge of energy, like for example, if you were a cave person and you get attacked by an animal, you need a surge of energy to protect yourself, right? That's your sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight response. That activates in response to that stress, increases your heart rate, gets more blood pumped into your muscles, diverts blood away from your intestines. Or the opposite of that is, okay, there's no threat, you're safe, you're going to rest, and you're going to digest your food. That's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's us when we're comfortable and feeling safe. The problem is we live in a world that is constantly putting the foot on the gas, sympathetic overdrive all the time. And when we do this through the gut-brain axis, it actually affects our digestion, compromises the gut barrier, and it can create inflammation. When you look at this list, these are the things that activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And most of us aren't making enough time for these things. And they're things that we love. We love these things. But we're so busy. I don't have time for that. Or at night, you get done with your day, and rather than engaging in some of these things to unwind and relax yourself, you instead open up Twitter and get triggered. So just be aware that this is an opportunity that we have. We went from a position of, I mentioned this earlier, where like these tribal connections that we had to early humans, it wasn't just like to feel good. This was real safety. We needed this to survive. We shared resources together. Isolation was threatening to your life. So we learned that we needed each other so desperately. And the problem is that the modern world doesn't observe connection the way that it used to. And this has weakened our bonds. And we need to get back to that. And I would make a very strong argument that human connection is needed now more than ever. And it has to be intentional because, like, clearly our culture is like eroding our ability to connect with one another. So we have to be the ones to restore that ourselves. And that physical affection and relationships, they activate the parasympathetic nervous system. They make us feel safe. When we feel bonded to others, we feel safe, we feel comfortable. And that allows us to heal our gut and recover and get the rest that our body needs. So this is really important. And the last thing they'll say is spiritual connection is also important. That if you look back through the entirety of human history, every single culture has come to the same conclusion, which is that there is a higher power. And that says to me, there's a natural yearning to understand ourselves and our purpose and why we're here. And that desire for relationship with a higher power, that desire to understand our purpose, we can't overlook that, and you can't replace that with rational thought. It's not possible. And when you try to replace it with activities or whatever it might be, that even if it's good and well intended, it's not the same. Ultimately, we need that. We need to open our heart to the possibility of something greater and bigger. For me, I'll just speak for myself, that the birth of my oldest daughter, who is 11 now, was completely transformative for me. And I'm so grateful that that happened, because if it didn't, I could never be the person I am today. And so I think it's important to open yourself up to the possibility of something greater and then listen to it. I'm not telling you what to believe. What I'm telling you is that you were meant to believe in something. And that's important to acknowledge that. So your prescription for gut immune health looks like this. You should nourish your body with whole foods. That means a diverse plant predominant diet. More. Establishing sleep consistency, early morning light exposure, regular timed meals with overnight fasting. That we should, by intention, manage our stress more effectively, which means creating space to rest and digest our nervous system through practices like mindfulness or deep breathing or nature immersion. That we should focus on human connection. Cultivating those connections is essential to human well being. But we should also embrace spiritual health, that through spiritual practices and community, we can nourish our soul for lifelong health. And that's so important. So, and with that, this is me. This is my website, theguthealthmd.com. Please come visit me there. I have a quiz that can tell you what your gut type is. I have a free email list, which is like being subscribed to a service, but like totally free. And I have my brand new book, Plant Powered Plus, that if you've enjoyed this talk, then I would appreciate if you support my work by grabbing a copy of that book. And thank you for your time.
Wow, Dr. B, my goodness, that was incredible. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has joined here today. If you have time, just a few questions, would that be okay?
Of course.
All right. So, first of all, thanks for the shout out. My other hat is Dr. Outdoors, and I love the early morning sunlight exposure and getting outdoors. We like that. Question is that I have patients sometimes who have a history of what you talked about with inflammatory bowel disease, such as ulcerative colitis or Crohn's or IBS. And when I talk to them about increasing the amount of fiber, they get really scared. So, what is your approach to this when people they feel like they feel better when they don't have a lot of fiber? And so, when I talk to them about beans and lentils and fruits and vegetables, they say, I can't do that. It really makes my symptoms worse. How should I counsel my patients and for our listeners that are out there maybe experiencing this? What's your advice?
Yeah. It's a nuanced topic. I wish that we were created in a way where this was easy and that I didn't have to sort of explain the paradox that exists in this particular issue. So, the reason that it's hard is because these foods, as I showed during the talk, are 100% dependent on the gut microbes to process and digest them. So it's conceptually similar to exercise, which is that if you haven't been in the gym in a while and you go to the gym, it is hard and it can also be painful in the very beginning. And if you overdo it, you could actually hurt yourself. Yet we all agree that the gym is healthy. We all agree that we should spend more time there, right? The same is true with fiber. We all agree, any reasonable scientist agrees that fiber is healthy and we should consume more of it. But the way in which we approach this, we have to be gentle about it. So, in the same way that if we were in the gym, we would start with an amount of exercise that we can tolerate, and then we would gently intensify over time. The same should be true with fiber, which is to start with the amount of fiber that you can actually tolerate and then gently increase over time. If I'm talking to someone with inflammatory bowel disease, this is not a 4 week plan. This is 4 months, 8 months, 12 months. I'm looking out and saying, let's not put too much pressure. It's not a short term thing. This is about your health in the long run. But the things that we do over the coming weeks and months, we can put you in a position where you will be so much healthier and reduce your risk of flares and other health issues.
Excellent. Thank you. And then also that slide that you share that all of the disease states related to dysbiosis just blows my mind. And I have a lot of patients, and we probably have a lot of listeners that maybe have an autoimmune disease or maybe allergies. And do you feel that by optimizing their gut microbiome, that possibly autoimmune diseases could be put into remission or be reversible?
I do. That was the inspiration behind my book because the truth is that I had so many patients coming into my clinic with these health related issues and they all want to know what to eat. And the problem is the conventional healthcare system says to them, it doesn't matter what you eat, just take your drug. But as I showed you in the Japanese study, they combined it wasn't even a vegan diet or a whole food plant-based no oil diet. It was a flexitarian diet. There was some liberties that existed in there. And those people did so much better compared to medication alone. So I'm of the belief that we need the best of both. The problem, Melissa, is that when people don't get recommendations from a credible source, then they take it upon themselves to turn to their own tools. And many times that's on the internet, whatever is the popular thing. And those are misguided approaches in general. So, what I'm trying to present is an evidence based approach where there is flexibility to meet you where you are, where you can choose the food that you love and that you enjoy, and yet simultaneously fulfill what I'm characterizing as the four workhorses of plant powered nutrition. Because if you get those four, you are moving in the right direction. And then we can build from there. This is not, you gotta, it's like so many aspects of our life. There's a story that we all have. And you have to understand that sometimes you're catching people early in their story. And that's a beautiful thing. And where they will be in 5 or 10 years is going to be so exciting.
Absolutely. I am hearing a lot about protein. If you could talk about protein, because it seems like everything right now, probably our listeners and viewers are seeing is protein, protein, protein. And as you shared, about 95% of Americans are fiber deficient. So if you could debunk maybe some of the myths that are percolating and circulating out there about gut health and overall health and well-being with regards to fiber, protein. We need both, but I feel that we hear a lot about protein nowadays.
Well, it's no different than 15 years ago and 30 years ago. And this is an ongoing issue is that real conversation gets drowned out by the protein thing.
Mhm.
And we get seduced by something that I am not like let me be the first to say I'm not anti-protein. I actually think it's very important, right? And I'm in the gym 4 or 5 days a week, and I'm in my I'm 45 years old. I'm halfway to 90. and I'm lifting the most weight that I've ever lifted in my entire life. It's much stronger than I was in my 20s. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't get enough protein. So I do think that protein is important, but the source of our protein is extremely important. And the issue is that for the vast majority of us, we're not facing a protein deficiency. I want to comment on that a little bit further in a moment, but before I get to that, it's a matter of like selecting what are the things that are missing that we really need to address, right? Because we're not going to get every single like micronutrient perfect. I'm sorry, we're just not going to. So what are the big picture things that we really need? And this is what I come back to. Number one, if I only have one, is fiber. This is the longevity nutrient. This is the gut health nutrient. And 95% of us are deficient. And if we just address that, we would radically transform health in this country. But then if you give me two, three, four, well, that's where I came up with my list of four, because those are not only the four foundations of a plant-powered diet, but they're also the things that are missing. We don't get enough polyphenols. So 80 to 90% of Americans are deficient in their fruit and vegetable intake. We don't get enough healthy fats because we're over consuming saturated fats. And we don't get enough fermented food. Most of us get no fermented food, to be honest with you, or very close to none. So to me, these are the things that need to address. Okay, back to the protein for a quick moment. So look, protein goals are not one size fits all. So the amount of protein that a person needs is dependent on their physical activity and the way in which they live their life. And so I hear all this discussion like, oh, you need 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. First of all, I find that to be absurd and not evidence-based. Second of all, there is an increased protein demand if you're more physically active. So step one is get into the gym. Step one is to get more physically active and get outside. And then you could adjust your protein intake to match those changes in your physical activity. And that is a beautiful thing because muscle is a metabolic organ. And as we age, our protein demands and requirements do go up. So the key from my perspective is we should fulfill both. We should fulfill our fiber intake and we should fulfill our protein intake. And the beautiful thing is we can accomplish that by eating more plants.
Excellent. And then one last question. We talked about dysbiosis and gut health. What if our viewers want to get their own gut tested? Well, how do they go about doing that? What do you recommend?
All right, so let me start by saying this, and this is probably going to come off a little bit weird, in the sense that I call me old school, but I'm of the belief that you should start with the free stuff because I actually think that what really matters is how do you feel, and do you have any gut symptoms? Are you able to consume the food that you want to eat without restriction and without fear that it's going to make you feel unwell? Right? Those are signs of gut health. And also, what does your bowel movement look like? Not to get too graphic, you don't have to publicly declare this, although, you know, I feel very comfortable talking about these things. But like, if I were a cardiologist, I'd be curious, what does your heart sound like? And I'm a gastroenterologist. And if I'm looking for intel on what's going on with your gut microbiome, well, you know what? Your bowel movement is 60 to 70% made up of microbes, not the excrement of your food. So we should be looking at that because we know when people are having healthy, regular bowel movements, their gut is in a much better place than when they are not. And then last but not least, I showed that list of over 130 different health conditions associated with dysbiosis. So my observation is that when their gut is in a position of struggling, they typically will have multiple diagnoses. It's a cluster and it affects different health systems. Why? Because the gut is at the center. So you might have irritable bowel syndrome or chronic constipation and simultaneously eczema and migraine headaches and excessive menopausal symptoms or excessive period symptoms. And you go down, and it affects your mood. You go down the line and you discover there's this pattern, right? So Melissa, to answer your question, first things first, let's look at those things. How do you feel? What is your bowel movement? What is your health history? Does it align with a history of dysbiosis? And then I think that like the gut testing, it's the best days for testing are coming. So I don't think that like as we sit here today, I wouldn't use that test above how do you feel in your health history. Will there be a day 5 or 10 years from now where using artificial intelligence, we're able to disentangle the complexity that exists within 38 trillion microbes? Yes. I think that day will come eventually, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Yep, completely agree. And just as Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut,
It
right?
really does.
So amazing. Well, we cannot thank you enough. I have heard you speak numerous times and I learn something new, lots of things every time I hear you speak. So to all of our listeners, please, if you haven't gotten your copy of Plant Powered Plus, please order it. And remember, there is Fiber Fueled and the Fiber Fueled Cookbook. They are fantastic resources. So please, please, please learn from Dr. B. And thank you so much, Dr. B. And just a few reminders to all of our listeners and our community. You can find links to all the session recordings in your Monday weekly emails. And friends and family can still sign up. It's free and open to all. And we'll make sure to get them any content they have missed. And we hope that you enjoyed this week's challenge. And don't forget to try the delicious recipes included in Monday's email. And if you haven't watched the cooking demo yet, be sure to check it out. It's a great way to get inspired in the kitchen. And thanks again for being here. And we'll see you next time. And thank you so much, Dr. B.